Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
So liquid glass has arrived. We had a bit of time to digest it since we were off last week, Steve, and WWDC came and went, and we got the whole shebang. Obviously, we could go down a whole criticism around the Apple Intelligence stuff and how they strategically chose not to talk about it. They did, but not really. Saying how we got all these features, but They gave like some cryptic comment around how their next generation version of Siri wasn't quite up to what they expected, but we're aiming to get that to you at some point, or something like that. So obviously they wanted everyone to focus on the liquid glass design. So today we'll unpack a couple, basically focus on the Apple stories today because there was a little bit that came out of it. For me, I'm being the tech enthusiast, I don't mind when they change things up a bit because that kind of gives you something new to play with and whatever. Obviously there was a lot of comparisons with the last time they did this with iOS 7, but I think that was a much more jarring change back then, going from the skeuomorphic design to basically just flat whites and no buttons and all that sort of thing. This to me seemed more safe because it ultimately still kind of looks the same. It's just that they've introduced obviously that glass reflective look and given it a bit more of a three-dimensional kind of view to it. I was okay with it, but then they devoted 90 minutes. Well, maybe that's an overkill. Maybe it felt like they devoted 90 minutes to talking about it. But I don't know if I was really one way or the other. Obviously, I've got a spare device or two, which I'll probably run one of the beta softwares on it just to have a quick look to see what it's like. But yeah, just starting there, I don't know if one way or the other I was that fussed about it, other than okay, that's a cool new thing to try and see what it looks like when it comes out.
Yeah, well, I think you're once again absolutely correct. I think it looks nice. I think the idea is nice. Will it change my life? Probably not. But it is interesting that we see Apple once again coming up with something that you can see the potential for, but the potential isn't realised. And it's interesting you mentioned Apple Intelligence, which, we were told all the back end was in there, it's been in there for 12 months now. But we still haven't really seen, what this Apple Intelligence is going to do. And the key there is going to do, because they told us it was going to do something. The glass is a little bit the same. It's going to revolutionise how we interact with our handheld devices. And I can see that it could, but I can't see any features or specific apps or evidence on how that's going to happen. So as a look, it's great. I think its functionality appears pretty good. It rather than, I guess, the old way of scrolling through apps, now we'll be able to move to them directly through liquid glass. But the reality is I don't think it makes a huge change or a huge step forward.
And that might just be an indication of there's such a big company now with so many billions of users that maybe they're running into the Microsoft problem, which is you don't want to piss off your user base too much because there's just too many of them. If you think back to the last redesign, they were much smaller then, and then if you go even before that time, they could pivot and make big changes, and the user base would just have to go along with it, and maybe they're just not in the position now to do that sort of thing.
It's interesting you say that. So, if I think about the big advances in the last 3 or 4 years of iPhones, it'd be nothing that the marketing department tells me, right? It's the fact that the battery life now is astounding. You put that any of the phones since the iPhone 12 up against the iPhone 12, you've got increased power, you've got of the actual applications with reduced energy usage, so the battery life has been extended and extended again. And so these sorts of things to me make the phones far more useful, far more durable and reliable, because you're not always searching for a charger. And yet they never talk about these sorts of advances as warranting, any fanfare, and yet they keep looking for these killer design features and killer features and telling us, yeah, gonna, you're gonna, we're gonna, it's gonna be unbelievable. But, I think, and we've said this now for a number of years, they're starting to push to the edge of what you can do with a device. I mean, the next step will be a transformational change, which will be a slimline folding phone or something like that.
An eye insert or something.
Well, I think that's got to be the next step. We'll be wandering around wearing headsets or something.
It's funny you mentioned like you'd call them the unsexy features, which are the I think given where phones have gotten to, regardless of iPhone or any other brand, that things like battery life and that sort of thing are more important,
and cameras as well.
Yeah,
I think they're exceptional now. The filters that you can use, exceptional, and the processing that allows you to do image generation or change filter images, exceptional, unbelievable.
And on that vein, the thing that I'm curious to see with what is now iOS 26, I can't say 19 because it's been rebranded, but
thank God for that. It finally matches up with something that makes sense.
But the thing is that I don't know what your experience has been like with iOS 18, but I've found it to be actually the worst release so far, not because of what it can do, but because it's so buggy. The amount of times I've actually run into issues where that usual responsiveness, that repetitive responsiveness, if you're just tapping in and out of apps and whatever, and it will do strange, bizarre things, like not regularly, but it does it enough that it loses some of that Apple shine. And I'm kind of like, I would have loved them to say in that keynote, hey, we're giving you liquid glass, and also we're going to take a step back from new features, and we're going to deliver you a Snow Leopard-like release with the back end where we only focused on making it rock solid stable.
Yeah, look, I'm hearing you, and these are the unsexy things. You can't. Well, I guess marketing people don't think you can sell devices by saying we've just made it really good, which ironically is actually why people originally started buying Apple 20 years ago, because they just made it really good. So yeah. Yeah, I think they can over-focus on these features, and maybe you and I are old school in that we actually believe that these features matter. Maybe today, for a younger audience, it's just like, yeah, that's cool, and
on to the next thing.
They don't really care if it does anything or not.
Well, one thing that has generated a bit of discussion following the liquid glass announcement was the actual effect of the transparency and the glass-like effects having an impact on the ability to actually read the content on the device itself. So, which, and that touches on accessibility features and whatever, and which is an interesting thing because this came up with Windows Vista back in the day when they introduced that glass-like interface, and although this is obviously a different context now, and obviously Apple's implemented it differently, but it's interesting that that's actually come up as a potential issue. And I guess one of the things I saw talked about was it'll be interesting to see what happens when obviously the iOS gets released and all these versions of the software get released, and say on the phone in particular, if people start going into the accessibility settings to reduce transparency and start switching off all the features of the design, if you get more people doing that, like say if only 5% of people doing that but 95% are happy, you've probably succeeded with the design. But if you get like 50, 60, 70% switching it all off, maybe your design is a bit of a failure.
I would have thought 30% or 20% would qualify as a failure, because I'm definitely going to be one of the 5% that probably do. That's typically what I do with my devices. It is interesting, but then once again, we're talking about such large user bases now that are spread, they're generational spread now too with Apple products. So yeah, I think you could be right in a lot of ways. It's going to be very hard for Apple to please everybody. How do you do that? So I guess they're probably trying to tread that tightrope to get it right effectively. But surely this just comes back to one thing, that somewhere soon they're going to have to come in with some sort of feature that revolutionizes their phones, because there's been a lot of talk for the last 2-3 years about what we're going to do, and we're still to really see something that they've done.
Now, on that note, but I don't think it actually qualifies it in the way you're suggesting, there is this idea of the 20th anniversary iPhone, which is coming up in 2 years' time, which is rumoured to have an all-glass design with the glass bleeding over the edges, no bezel, no front-facing camera that's visible, the Face ID stuff's under the camera. So essentially, you'd argue that if they achieve this is like the purest form of the design, because it's just all glass on the front. You know, Johnny Ive would be happy, I'm sure, kind of thing. But and that the idea being that so much glass is being used in that design that the liquid glass software design is meant to complement that altogether. And like essentially them releasing it now is sort of like it gives them 2 years of runway to tweak the interface so that it perfects it for that. Now, I don't think this phone necessarily is going to be the revolutionary thing that you're talking about. Obviously, they're also talking about, folding phones actually coming out from Apple at this time, maybe next year, maybe the year after. There's the rumor of the thin iPhone that's coming out this year. And you could, if they do release a phone that's only like 5.2 millimeters thick or whatever, or thin as they like to say, you can see that could ostensibly become a folding phone, because, if you fold 2 of those over, then you've still got a thin device, all that kind of stuff. So it's still iterative though. Like that, okay, we've got iPhone 20 or iPhone XX, however you want to call it. Maybe it might have the same impact that the iPhone 10 did back in the day, but I guess it might be a bit harsh to say that, it's still iterative and everything, but at the end of the day, what do you do with this design now other than that, really?
Well, I agree. And I actually, to be honest, I think that the iPhone XX 20, whatever it is, sounds absolutely delightful to look at. I can just imagine the size of the case you're going to have to put it in to keep it pristine. So, I think, well, maybe people do look after their phones better than me. I don't know. But once you put a case around something like that, is it its original design, elegance anyway? And then you think about what is possible with the super thin materials, with the fact that they're getting more from the chips these days, less power. There is potential to do something quite amazing, I'm sure. But what is it? Will anyone have the guts to turn a phone into, say, something the size of a cigarette lighter? Do we need the screen? Do you not need the screen anymore? Because can you just speak into your phone? If you don't need to interact with apps, or you just need to get advice, then do you need a screen? We're in really, really strange territory. And I'd like to see a phone come out without a screen, to be quite honest, and to be all verbal based. But I wouldn't want to be the executive making the choice to run with that. So I totally get it. Let's hope that we do see some really revolutionary design coming through in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. And just finally, I wanted to throw this in off on the side, this ad that I saw yesterday, which has since been pulled off of YouTube and I guess everywhere, because it was truly a terrible ad by Apple. And I misread it when I first saw it. That's why I thought I'd watch it, which I thought it said convince your parents to get a Mac, but it actually was convince your parents to get you a Mac. And that was where I started watching it, and it was just, when you think back to the PC Mac guy ads, they were kind of fun. They were having a go at the PC guy and all of that. But it was kind of done in a more fun, lighthearted kind of way that was it's still a bit empathetic. Like, it wasn't like a complete smackdown kind of thing. And this ad was just terrible. I was just watching it going, who in their right mind thought this was a good idea? Like, basically this really pretentious guy at the front of the room lecturing everyone in the lecture hall, as if a whole bunch of students were going to sit in a lecture about buying their parents a Mac, or getting their parents to buy them a Mac. And it had all the same talking points that the PC Mac sort of guy ads had, but done in this really condescending way. And I'm an Apple user, but I was almost tempted to say F you to that and go and buy a Windows PC after that. And that might be why they pulled it. I don't know.
I think you're right on that. I mean, I haven't seen the ad, but I can imagine. And if you're a young adult and you're at college or university, Macs used to be a symbol of individuality, a little bit of a rebel, whatever, not fitting into the PC system. To think that you'd show up with an Apple and people might look at you and go, oh, their parents bought them their laptop. It's not a good look, is it? Even from, there's no independence there. There's no individuality. Your parents still treating you like you're 8 years old. So, or you're treating your parents like you're 8 years old, even worse. So, yeah, I can see why it's been pulled.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. Well, I guess, we'll see liquid glass in a couple of months, and then the iPhone 20 in a couple of years, and we'll see if this all comes to fruition.
Oh, what more could we wish to wait for?
Absolutely. Alrighty, so that's it for this week's episode. We'll catch you next time.